And remember, everyone, if you have questions about VTM, about storytelling, about the nature of horror as a genre to present to players through any system, because a lot of us might have our familiarity with D&D and how D&D as a system can present fear, horror. There are escalation style rules that put pressure on resource management, such as long rests being 1 day, or I'm sorry, 7 days, and short rests being 1 day, or like an 8-hour sleep. So there are different mechanics in D&D. If you're familiar with this, but you're curious about VTM, this is going to be the workshop for you. We are going to keep things, PG-13, though due to the nature of it, and especially the types of horror I'm going to talk about with Derek, we don't need to get into visceral detail, but, intense topics can come up. So be aware of that. Remember, in Vampire the Masquerade, you are not necessarily the good guys. You are monsters who are in an existence of eternal managed decline, where you are constantly fighting for food and shelter, the basic necessities of life, despite you not even being alive. Because if you don't, well, humans will put you down, other vampires will put you down, and other supernatural creatures will put you down too. Vampires and werewolves don't traditionally mix too well, and a mage would probably want to dissect you, or something.
Well, let's just say that in vampire history, in its lore, mages, the last time mages and vampires got involved, we got the Tremere.
And it was all downhill from there.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. And just for anybody else to end up asking, if there is one clan you will see me, let me use Maddie's vernacular, poo-poo upon, it will always be the Tremere. Always. The Tremere deserve it at every step of the opportunity. No, I'm not apologizing for that. So.
There we go. There you go in chat. Oh. This is the Tremere right here. All right. So we have Derek. We have all of you. You all are welcome to ask questions. Now, if you do have mechanical questions, the overall intent is not necessarily to get into the minutia of the game, where we're teaching you how to build characters and where to put your points in things, and how there's not really a level up system. It's just constant, EXP build up and whatever expenditures. You can ask questions like that, but we're not here to present that the crunch, not the super crunch of the game. Mechanics can be brought up, especially to help answer some of these questions, but we're going to explore the nature of horror that Vampire the Masquerade can really present and hone. At least I will be talking to Derek about that, but you all might have other questions. And don't forget, Derek also runs a VTM workshop on his channel on Mondays. Although, here's a little secret. You can talk to Derek about vampires anytime he's streaming. And also Battletech.
Sad and true.
He can be in the middle of drawing something, drawing whatever. And if you have a vampire question, ask him. Now, he just sets aside time where he's like, this is the topic. I'll roll up my sleeves and I'll pull up a blank character sheet. We will pound out a character. I will get into the details, with that with you. Anyway, so when we go back to the chart that we've been building the conversation of horror upon, we have that the unknown is the major factor in horror, because that's what challenges our sensibilities, or in this case, our norms, values, morals, beliefs, and our atmosphere. And it can pierce into that in at least 5 different ways, but there's other ways that we can challenge it or combine things. We have suspense, fear, violence, gore, and the supernatural. Now, this is probably the lowest hanging fruit, Derek. If I want to use Vampire the Masquerade, and specifically everyone, we're talking about 5th edition, though, I mean, there's some universal constants. If I want to run a supernatural horror game, or at least a game that that induces terror, which is the feeling of dread and anticipation that precedes the horrifying experience, it's the build-up. Horror is what happens after the bang, after the thing. It's the body that's discovered. It's the blah, blah, blah. It's the result. And, of course, then we have thriller, which can be mixed in there. It's an exciting, suspenseful player story. It's the thing that gets you to ask what happens next, that keeps you on the edge of your seat. If I want to use VtM and I want to run supernatural horror, can you pitch some ideas or concepts to those of us who might want to play or even run a chronicle as a storyteller in ST? You know, in D&D we have DMs. STs are the storytellers in VtM here. What can we bring? What can we invoke? In fact, I might have even accidentally touched on a couple of those with with the conversation about mages and whatnot. But if we're playing vampires, and let's maybe we can exclude vampires. If we know we're already a vampire and that's already supernatural, is there more supernatural danger or horror?
There is all kinds of supernatural danger, but you brought me here to play or to discuss vampire, Maddie. How dare you end up saying that? Ignore vampires. What are you doing?
Well, you could always say, well, there's other vampires. You, as a vampire, of course, are pure and wholesome as the wind-driven snow. It's the other vampires you got to watch out for.
Yeah, I've run into my fair share of those, and it never ends well. But okay, so let's think about a few things. Okay, in fact, for those who involved in my channel, you'll know that one of my top 3 clans at all time is Ventru. So let me give you a little bit of a thought here. They have 3 core disciplines. I'm not going to get into the minutia, but let me give you the basic idea here. The first one, fortitude. No matter what the hell you do to me, it's not going to wound me. It's not even going to affect me. I really don't care. You hit me with a semi-truck, I'm more mad that you wrecked my suit than I am any personal injury. So you can't really do anything here to them without some major working up towards the combat. You then have the second one, presence. You can be liked or feared by anyone you so choose at the drop of a hat. But then there's the third one, and this is called dominate. Now, dominate is you will do what you're told, you will think what I tell you to think, you will remember what I tell you to remember. Now, if we end up bringing that into the equation, there's 2 different takes that you can end up running with it, and both work incredibly well. The first one is, how can you be 100% sure anything you have encountered is not the result of a dominate rule? Long story short, if you're dependent on your understanding of a history or a previous portion of your backstory, but dominate exists, there should be a fear that something about your understanding of the world is not completely true. For those who are fans of old-timey games like Knights of the Old Republic, you might remember Darth Revan. Perfect example of that. When it comes down to you looking at this as a threat, right, you start realizing that as an external, what could be done to you. A character may come across as more likable, but reality has been using presence. But then we also go to the flip side, and the flip side is actually probably more dangerous. You see, one of the problems is if you can make somebody do whatever you want them to do, think whatever you want them to think, say whatever you want them to say, and believe whatever you want to believe, why do you care about their opinion? You start realizing that ultimately you stop looking at people as people. They start becoming just pawns on a board. They're something that can be moved and sacrificed at any given time with little more than a word and a little bit of increase of hunger. That's it. And because of that, you have these same situations where you were talking about values, you were talking about morals. This is where you start getting into that violence. You're doing more than just, beating the tar out of somebody. You are stripping away who they are. You are able to remake them as you wish for them. And in doing so, stripping away the one thing that they have. The one thing you would think is normal to everybody. That sense of self. You don't need to worry about the bloodletting. You don't need to worry about the beast. That's the more primal stuff. That's going into the idea of gore, right? And violence. What I'm talking about is that unsure that what you are existing in is true. And this is something that is very strongly used by a lot of Ventru and even Malkavians who have access to a very similar line of disciplines, though they may have a slight specialty in another location. Does that help answer your question, Maddie?
Absolutely, because other vampires are indeed a threat. I mean, you could argue that you're also a threat to yourself due to your very nature, but yeah, Coffee, we do have Derek as a guest directionless voice haunting us. Now, as a vampire, I get, in D&D terms, you get magic powers, which are your disciplines. These are the things that really let you go even more above and beyond your own undead body and the things that you can do with that. We did just we joked about it that there are other supernatural entities that even vampires might need to fear. You can, and so if I'm a vampire, Derek, and I have these powers, I am above and beyond most mortals, just even as a fledgling, as a neonate. I'm a demigod in that basic power level. If I want to run a horror story that involves the supernatural, can or should vampires be scared of ghosts?
Absolutely. Understand that you are effectively a corpse that they are seen walking around. You have what they want, the ability to actually enact their own will upon the mortal plane. You need to understand that when it comes down, especially like Tremere and Malkavians, they perpetually end up having to deal with ghosts. Not even to mention the Hecata. Hello to all my Giovanni players out there. But that being said, you're talking about ghosts. Okay, you want to bring in other supernaturals, right? You have ghosts, wraiths. You have mages, you have werewolves, but you can bring in all kinds of stuff. Let me give you a simple example from Edmonton. Still technically in vampire, but right now it's not running like vampire. It's actually closer to Call of Cthulhu. The reason being is the very nature of what you and I both know is something called an antediluvian, meaning before the flood. What this is kind of like the vampire progenitor. Each clan has one. Problem is that they are so close to godhood that each one is effectively an eldritch being unto itself, does not play by the rules. You might think of these individuals as an individual, as just another walking corpse with immense power, but no, they can be so much more. One in New York, Zemesis, is literally a fungus that grows all throughout New York. Fundamentally, this entire city is an eldritch being that is slowly being manipulated through just the smallest of nudges over thousands of years. And that used to be one of the big headlines. We're talking about the Week of Nightmares, a point of history that dealt with the Clan Ravnos' antediluvian. These are existential horrors that are far bigger. You earlier said you can't beat Cthulhu, right? You give Cthulhu hit points.
Yep.
See that you're missing the point. Well, that's what antediluvian is. And that's what's being dealt with in Edmonton by night that Coffee Cat's currently playing in, and Raven. So
I do want to point out, because that is terrifying, but also that's the plot to the Super Mario Brothers live action movie. And now I can't look at that movie in the same way.
Yep.
And by the way, everyone, sometimes you need a point to actually laugh and breathe before you delve back into the humor. Otherwise, it could be too crushing. So this is how I cope with that sort of thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Derek.
No, it's okay. But like right there, we're not you. And what I'm trying to illustrate more than anything is, and this is hard for a lot of newer players to understand, is the reason I typically stick to almost always just vampire. Like, I don't typically run vampire. I don't typically run hunter. I'll pull from those modules. I'll use them as plot points and what have you, NPCs, and going through it. But the reason I primarily stick to vampire is because you can name any, I mean this, like any horror movie, and I can tell you what clan would likely have caused that. And it doesn't have to be a vampire. In fact, the further you go away from a vampire, ironically, the more you're going to end up finding it. Because the devil's in the details. Each vampire unto itself is a different style of horror. And I try and emphasize that. But if we're going to go into other supernaturals, understand that, like, depending on what edition you're running, we could be talking about Demon the Fallen, which is literally you playing as demons. You could be the equivalent to the Crossroad demon, Crowley from Supernatural. You could end up playing Mummy, where quite literally you start as an all-powerful being, but with no knowledge of who you once were. And as you start wandering around in mortal times, when it starts, you could literally summon a sandstorm or a plague of locusts. You are this unstoppable thing. But as you start to wane in power, you start to gain memories of who you were, and you start to end up realizing your old attachments. In some way, your legacy is still here, and you are actively destroying it. You can go into werewolf, right, which is all about pack, about family, but the horror of this rage and this world that ultimately is dying. You can talk about changeling, go across the hedge. We earlier talked, one of the most difficult ones to end up going is, why should I be afraid of a pixie? Why should I be afraid of Rumpelstiltskin?
Yeah.
Right?
If only you knew.
Right? If only you knew. Understand the real value of a tooth fairy. These exist in World of Darkness. So you can pull from these, absolutely. The only reason I don't end up doing that so frequently is because I will, 9 times out of 10, I will look for what makes sense in a given situation. So a haunting turns to more of a murder mystery, trying to end up finding the fetish that holds that spirit into the current plane. How to end up controlling it, and how to end up exercising it. How to stop these things from ultimately spilling forward and going worse. These are situations that are common in vampire, absolutely.
And so vampires can be scared of ghosts.
Oh, they can be. Vampires on the power scale in World of Darkness are almost bottom of the pecking order.
Yeah.
Let
that be a revelation for you all out there. You're like, yeah, but you just said the lowest tier vampire is like a demigod among mortals. Yes. And then there's everything else.
The hardest part that, and the best way I can describe it is, the thing that is unique to vampire specifically, and obviously I'm a big fan of vampire, so, I'll shill for it all day. But the thing that is unique about vampire specifically, out of all the horrors that can happen in World of Darkness, vampires are uniquely tied to humanity.
Yes.
In almost every way. In a certain regard, it's not the vampire you need to be worried about. It's the rest of humankind when you're playing other supernatural creatures. So werewolves, for instance, can hide amongst the populace, but they're not of the populace. But they typically don't have the influence of a vampire. That's not what they're built to do.
Yeah.
They're almost like the white blood cell of the planet. That's really their operation, but they're not involved in it. You take a look at demon, your ability to grant wishes, but while you can end up doing these bargains and what have you, you don't exactly have the ability to end up getting the missile codes. Some creatures in World of Darkness, as fantastical as they are, look at human beings and our capability of devastating power and going, I'm not touching that with a 20-foot pole.
Yeah.
And vampires are uniquely tied into that. So humanity is ironically the best cover, but it's not. The Masquerade isn't just to protect against their own or the humans under them. It is everything else. It is you do not poke this bear. Even mages agree. Like, mages can and create all kinds of spells and all this kind of stuff, but if they do so in front of a human that's not awake, paradox kicks in. Not getting too deep into that, but that turns into a shield for kindred. And therein lies the thing. If you're taking a look at, be another good one, Wraith, right? If you ever read into Wraith, I'm going to tell you right now, that is Depression the game. And that's, anybody who's played it and played in a good game of it knows that's not an exaggeration. But the fact of the matter is that the longing to be in amongst them is the big talking point there. Even if you're taking a look at New World of Darkness, which has some fascinating creatures that are alternative in that regard. Take a look at Promethean. Promethean is the idea, ironically, Promethean and Soul Eater, Sin Eater, there we go, are probably the two systems that are showcasing, ironically, some degree of hopefulness. In Promethean, you are Pinocchio, you are Frankenstein's monster, you are the Terminator. You are something that looks human but is not and wishes to be or try and emulate your Data from Star Trek. And you're slowly forging yourself to become a real boy. But that comes with some caveats along the way because you're always going to be treated like Frankenstein's monster. Alright? You can take a look at Sin Eater, which is literally, you died, something grabbed your soul and said, you know what, I'm going to give you a life extension, but I get to ride shotgun. And this thing comes with you, and now you are host to this spirit. And you think that, okay, you know what, I'm back, I'm alive, fantastic. But this thing wants to experience life, and it's got no time for you. So you go about your day, everything's all good, and then the next day you wake up tired, you realize that there's 5 lines of white stuff on a mirror, 4 of them have been tracked, there's a dead cheerleader in the corner, and you realize that you're currently holding a Game Boy, and you have to look at the spirit, what the hell did you do? Have to go faster. Okay, I got to catch them all. Like, what the hell happened? Well, this thing decided to take your body and go for a ride to figure out what is life, and you get to deal with this now because it wants to experience everything and it doesn't have time for your day-to-day activities.
And I think what ties each of these together is through the specific supernatural point. These are all ways to explore that unknown, whether it's self, it's power, it's a concept of exploring death. And I'm looking at you all out there. Just because you're playing a vampire, to bring it back to VtM, doesn't mean you have any clue how undeath works, how vampirism works. And the even weirder part is a lot of vampires don't even care. They just know it works. And the ones that do know will probably just lie to you about it. And so there's a great mystery. There's still a great unknown. There are ideas in how this might work. But also every vampire is different, and it's inconsistent. Some vampires are repelled by silver. I saw Orchid talking about silver bullets earlier this evening. Others, plug them full, and they'll just, dude, that was a $600 leather coat. What are you doing?
Yeah, pretty much, right? You don't know what you're dealing with, and you don't know what the hell's going on with you. So let me flesh it out just a little bit. I'm gonna go real quick. The core 7 clans and the Thin Blood and Caitiff. So these are the what you get in the core rulebook. But I want to showcase each one being its own individual horror.
Okay.
Okay. So this is why I say each vampire clan has its own theme. Earlier on, I mentioned about Ventru. Ventru, the clan of kings. Well, they can say and do everything that they want to do. Yeah, you can, but you will start to realize you separate from humanity very quickly. It is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And worse for Ventru, that's a survival mechanism. Okay, we can take a look. Let's go to their cousins, the Toreador. Okay, if you take a look at the Toreador, right? At first, I know a lot of people love to end up doing this. It's the clan of artists and fashionistas. It is the clan of self-expression, and oh my, how beautiful it is. No, for these individuals, try and imagine living with an ennui while existing in bullet time. Okay, things don't change for them. They are ultimately stuck in a world where they have to surround themselves with beautiful things, trying to fight off this sense of boredom with life, whilst trying to end up getting as much as they can end up doing in that regard, because what ultimately drives them is the need to feel alive again. They can become entranced when they run across something that might remind them of that time where, they got married on their wedding night and the honeymoon, and suddenly remembering how the stars looked at that point, and they're just looking, and then they realize what they've been looking at is the child that they never had. But now they need to have it. Congratulations, you're now considering kidnapping a baby.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what Toreador are. They need to feel alive again. They need to break that sense of ennui, right? Let's flip it around. Let's take a look at Bruja. Have you ever felt the need to rebel? Have you ever felt that need that things aren't quite right, that you need to end up standing up and, I believe I'm allowed to drop an F-bomb, but I will save it for now. But, screw them, we're going to fight against them, all this kind of stuff. You can play that, but the thing about Bruja is that they will take that, the blood will take that, and twist it. It will start making it so that you are ultimately a monster that has to get its way and does not like being told what to do. To the point where you almost become ideologically focused and driven. This one thing, whatever it is you are about, becomes a singular focus. This is the way it has to be, and you will fight for it to be that way. Problem is that the blood doesn't care what your call is. It has no concept of just, fair, or right. All it cares about is you are about X. And it's going to give you the influence to be able to make people fall your way. It's going to end up giving you the strength to be able to crush cars with a single flex. And it's going to make you move faster than bullets can fly. That becomes the problem. It doesn't care what it is at that regard. And you will snap at the drop of a hat every single time it ends up coming up. Let's take a look at Gangrel, right? We're talking about Gangrel. We're talking about something that is ultimately animalistic. We are talking about something that is primal, something that understands the beast and is survive at all costs. You are more comfortable with the animals than the beast itself, that thing that makes you kill, that thing that tells you have to feed, than you are with humanity itself.
For all of you out there, I'm currently piloting a Gangrel character in my Sunday night game with local friends.
And Gangrel have this particular problem where, first off, when they frenzy, when they lose it, they kind of like it, but it also leaves them scarred in a certain way. Maybe they'll have an animalistic musk, or maybe they'll start to grow more of a snout, or maybe they'll start getting little nubs that are trying to grow into wings, or maybe they'll start having scales appear under their eyes, or maybe their eyeballs are going to end up becoming more slits than circles. They're going to change, and the older they get, the more they frenzy, the longer these last, to the point where they look like a cross between a human and an animal. Like if you dealt with a gangrel that looks like they might be almost akin to a werewolf, no, that's just a gangrel who's been around long enough that those animalistic traits have stuck.
Yeah.
Right? You stop thinking about what's required. You start going, on a sheer hunter level. Do I eat it? Is it a threat? Or can I make it succumb to my authority? That's it. That's all you care about. This is your territory. And that's not always to say they're always in the wild. The gangrel board member, right, is one of the best against type gangrel you're going to find, because that is a boardroom predator. And you're going to end up finding that. If we end up scaling on, I'm trying to remember what clan comes next. I believe it's Malkavian. Sorry, I gotta end up going into my own sheet real quick.
Yep, Malkavian's next.
Yeah. So Malkavians, you have the ability to know the world as it really is, or maybe as you think it is. It doesn't really matter. They're often considered unhinged and seers. The Mad Seer, maybe you remember Curse of Strahd with the tarot cards. That's a Malkavian.
Yep.
Okay. The one thing that I warn players against is don't confuse this with something that is utterly sympathetic. This is where your clan that is the most likely to get something more akin to a serial killer in it. Because something breaks in you every single time you're embraced. You're going to end up, or in every single embrace, something breaks in you, I should say. There is something fundamentally broken in every one of the Malkavians, and that is something that is shown in their clan symbol of the broken mirror. They see things as a broken reflection. They see auras. They can literally taste when you're lying. They can end up watching spirits. They can maybe piece things together and almost get visions. They are able to end up hiding in shadow and become, well, not quite invisible. No one's going to pay attention to you. And they can whisper things into your mind, and you will take them as truth. They are a clan of questionable insight, and when things go wrong for a Malkavian, they go incredibly wrong. They are incredibly unstable. This is one thing I try and tell most new players: stop thinking Joker or Harley Quinn, think more Gacy or Dahmer.
Yeah.
And you will probably get a better understanding of this clan, because I think too many times this is probably the one clan that everybody wants to what we call a fish milk. Try and end up building a character that is more focused on I'm lol random. No, this is sad. This is dark, and it can get very depraved very quickly because your mind starts to turn on you. You can't be sure about what your storyteller, what your dungeon master is telling you is actually real. You might be coming to conclusions based off of a not quite truth that's being told. Why? Because your dice rolled the wrong way, and you suddenly get these bouts of just crippling. How to put this? When things go wrong with a Malkavian, they go catastrophically wrong, and you're not operating in the same world that everybody else is. There's a reason that some people will end up referring to you as mad, because you see beyond that veil. You're operating on something completely different than what everybody else knows.
And you mentioned a DM in this description as well, because we're we're bringing this back as well for people who might only have D&D roleplay experience. And then, of course, we're filtering that through the concept of horror. As Derek is discussing the different clans here, don't mistake these as race or class in Dungeons and Dragons. Malkavian is not a class. It's not like, oh, a Malkavian's a divination wizard. In a broad concept, sure. But the way that this works is not... it's not the same.
I think I have a good way to tie it in. Jade is a Malkavian. Bright wouldn't be. Despite the fact that Bright is the one who ends up getting the visions and all that, hers is still locked in reality.
Yeah.
Jade is not. Right? To bring it back to that. But each one of these are core concepts that, guess what? You can have that druid that's gone completely feral. Right?
Yeah.
The Brewhog, you know what that is? That's a paladin. That's a paladin that got bent. That went the wrong way. Right? You take a look at the Toreador, that is the... I don't know if you've ever seen the kind of damage a chaotic evil bard can do, but I'm sure Maddie can stat up a few and showcase like how you can really cause some damage in that regard.
There are similarities in the concepts, but don't mistake race and class for the clan.
No, absolutely not. Anybody can be embraced in any clan, and it's something I tell people in my VTM workshops. I hammer this point home over and over and over again because it's so important. There are stereotypes to a clan, but that is more to do with the individual person coping with the curse that each of these different clans brings. Each one of these clans has a different curse, and it must be mitigated, and so the stereotype oftentimes comes from a lot of people coming to the same conclusion. A simple example, Toreador like art. No, they need to be around nice, proper aesthetics. So art is one of the things that they will end up gravitating to, certainly. But you could have been a farm or a stable hand in life. You get embraced with the Toreador, eventually you're going to figure out, these headaches go away when I'm in this museum, so I like being here. So it's more of a survival mechanism than that. And each one of these can have that.
A Toreador's domain could even be something that would make a Zamisi throw up in their mouth. Like, you did this? If that's their aesthetic, if that's a sense of completeness or beauty, such as the obsession.
And I wanted to make that clear because one of the things a lot of people tend to try and start with the clan and then fill in to play that style of clan. I usually tell people, if your character isn't good enough that I could randomly roll what clan you get and you'd be happy with any choice because you know the person well enough and figuring out how they would adapt to their curse, you haven't figured the character out enough to be able to play it.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Let's continue real quick. I was trying to rapid fire this, but Nosferatu. Right? Let's go to Nosferatu. This is the clan of the hidden. Why? They are hideous. Okay, there's something wrong with them. When you look at them, you know something's off, and that is the good-looking Nosferatu. Some of the older Nosferatu, you couldn't tell that they were human to begin with. They might be mistaken for demons or something like that. Ultimately, Nosferatu are that thing in the shadow. The best way I can describe it is, if you have ever had the experience of going to bed, just laying there, and then maybe something caught your attention in the corner of your eye, you turn and you don't see anything, and you kind of dismiss it. That is a Nosferatu. That is watching you, and you think you see it, you don't, you move on, but it's watching you. Mm-hmm. It's a clan of secrets. It's a clan that is brutal and vicious. The rats serve as spies. The crows observe for it. It knows everything you are, and it exists in the filth and the unwashed and in the sewers and the places where the old good people don't go. because that's where people turn a blind eye. That's where they can feed. That's where they can hunt. That is how they end up coping with it, because if you were to ever cross a Nosferatu, understand that they may look frail and decrepit due to this horrible thing that has happened to them, but don't mistake this for weakness. They are also capable of ripping out an engine block out of a car and beating you to death with it. So you are talking about something that is a straight up boogeyman. It's hiding in your closet. It's hiding just under the stairs. It's waiting for you to go to sleep, and you don't stand a chance when you do.
Yep.
Right? Take a look at Tremere. Tremere, the quest for knowledge, obsession, perfection must be achieved. Blood sorcerers who will stop at nothing to end up gaining power in not only the mystic arts, but the human arts in that regard. You will end up getting specialists of all kinds in Clan Tremere, but you are operating in what is effectively a broken pyramid scheme. Your blood feels weakened because of your curse. You're not able to do what other vampires take for granted, namely the blood bond, but we'll get into that too much. But one of the things you can do is these smaller sorceries, a pale imitation of what a mage can actually do. But Tremere itself has this need for perfection in all things. The problem that Tremere will often end up facing is that they are ultimately beholden to one another. They are very insular, as they're not a normal clan. You see, they're artificial. They stole their immortality, and every vampire knows that in one way or another. Never trust a Tremere. If you were to ever get a proper Tremere experience, right away the first thing is nobody really wants to talk to you, nobody wants to shoot straight with you, and nobody wants to associate with you unless they can help it. And if they are, they typically want something. Average for most kindred, but congratulations, that means you're coming up in the ladder.
Yeah.
Talked about the Ventru again. The idea that, yes, you can become the ultimate authority. Problem, you start to divorce yourself from people in that regard. You stop looking at people as people and start looking at them as pawns, because it takes little more than a word for you to make them operate however you want. Then there comes down to the last two. The Caitiff and the Thin Blood. Now, these two used to be similar in a certain regard back in the day, but here's the big thing with Caitiff. Caitiff are the thing that doesn't fit. If you think the Tremere is ostracized, the Caitiff is 10 times worse. In fact, in many settings, Caitiff are killed on sight. Because, bluntly, something went wrong in their embrace. Usually they don't know who their sire is, who made them, or why they were created. They are oftentimes maligned and cast aside. They're runoff, they're rabble, that's a name for Brujah, but you get the point. Caitiff they don't have a clan. It's what Caitiff means, clanless, without family. And because of that, they are probably one of the most horribly treated of all of them. But they do have the capability of being useful. This is one of the most dangerous portions, because you basically just agreed to being the bottom of the barrel in hopes to not die. Okay, now there are a few exceptions, of course, but Caitiff very much are the clan that doesn't fit. And because of that, they struggle in almost every set of the word. They are a clan about struggle. Well, again, clanless, but they are a group that is about struggle. And then there's Thin Bloods, the half-dead, the Duskborn. Thin Bloods. You are supposedly a herald of the end of the world. You're the end of the bloodline. Your blood has become too thin through embrace after embrace after embrace, all the way from Cain up to you, that you're no longer able to make new vampires, or you're highly likely to just kill somebody in the attempt. You struggle just to end up being able to do anything that a normal vampire can do. Normal vampire gets shot, they just heal up the wound almost instantly. They'll just rouse the blood and good as new. Thin blood, you don't have that ability. You get shot and you feel like a regular human being. And some of them might even have the equivalent of drowning in their own self because they took a shot to the lung. You are half dead, still looking for blood. Maybe you can get in the sun, maybe not. But you don't have real powers. You don't have any real abilities. You're just the thing that is kept around. But everybody is a little worried about you. Because Thin Bloods have only one... Well, they have a few things to go in for them, but the big one that you need to watch out for is Thin Bloods are the only ones that can come back. Thin Bloods, supposedly, if they kill the one who made them, can become human again. We might remember the Masquerade at that point, but let's move that aside. This is the one of you trying to undo your curse while being tempted to embrace your curse. You see, Thin Bloods have a second portion on that. They have to cannibalize another vampire. And if they do that, they now become a member of that clan. They're the only group who can do this. So either way, they're incentivized to kill an elder. They're incentivized to kill another vampire. And this is the thing that's running in the back of almost every kindred's head. That's why they are oftentimes treated so badly. Or if you're believing in the Camarilla propaganda in that regard. But here you are dealing with something that is excised. And while Caitiff and Thin Blood can be treated the same, ultimately their problems differ greatly. Caitiff is a question of who are you? Where do you come from? Mm-hmm. But a Thin Blood is a question of where do you go? If you had an opportunity to get your mortality back, how far would you go? And if not, how do you rise to prominence? And who do you gotta kill to get ahead? So you notice with just these core groups we find in the base book, we are developing a whole line of different styles and different flavors of horror, from the grotesque to the psychological to the social. We have clipped all of the categories that you had up there, Maddie.
Absolutely.
And because of that, that's one of the reasons I point to Vampire as a fantastically well-rounded game, because you can, to a certain extent, as a player, choose what style of horror you want. What are you trying to end up going into? It can be awesome, but if played well, it should also be terrifying. You, as a player, should be just a little bit worried about what you are about to do and how it might come back. What's worse is the decisions that you make willingly. And that will happen eventually in Vampire. I promised Maddie a few years ago when I originally showed him Vampire 5th Edition in that regard. I will make you into a monster. As your ST, that's my job, is to show you what kind of monster you really are. And that is where the experience of Vampire really kicks in.
Pick a tragedy and a persecution, because that is where you can take this. If there's something in your life, if there's something in all of your lives out there that makes you sad, upset, that you feel persecuted or made fun of, or that you've been the subject of some sort of unfair treatment by others, or even your own self, because maybe you have a disorder of some kind, this is a system that will let you explore it, and you can really go with it if you and everyone at your table is willing to take it there. Because on that back cover, it wasn't just political horror, it was personal horror as well. Can you only imagine? We've all had those impulses of not wishing well on other people who have crossed us or whatever. This lets you, through a roleplay setting, find out what that is. What is the extreme? What are the consequences and arguably the rewards? Is that juice worth the squeeze? Now, Derek, real quick, Dark Druid here asked, what do you think the most dangerous clan in V5 is? Dark Druid is thinking Thin Bloods.
Thin Bloods can be. And I guess that depends on your level of what you're looking for. That. I have always said the most underappreciated, most dangerous clan is the one that everybody dismisses. And in this regard, it is Toreador. To be getting the crosshairs of a Toreador, I mean, really do more than just peeve them off, like to the point of livid. They will spend all of eternity crafting your end. To them, the very act of revenge is an art form. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be a one and done. It's not going to be a simple, we're going to drag them into a basement with a baseball bat and some tools. No, they will go out of their way to craft events around your life to the point where you will be begging that it end. And that begging will be the thing that they fall asleep to each night.
Yeah.
That is what you will be reduced to. And the second you stop working, well, then they get bored. So pray that they get bored with you.
I would think I'm going to zoom out from there, and I think that the arrival of the Thin Bloods and the fact that they exist and that they can propagate themselves is showing the end of vampirism, because it's finally the curse, God's curse on Cain has run its course. And not only does this mark the end of vampirism, but this then also allows for an oncoming age of superhumanism, because Thin Bloods are powerful humans. I mean, Derek, I think you'll get what I'm saying, but for those of you out there are Thin Bloods who can walk out during the day or have children. But you also get to dip some toes into the vampiric power pool. This is like the rise of the next form of humanity. And if we're looking at vampires as a curse, as punishment from God for the sin of Cain murdering his brother, this would then be the running out of the curse and the development of God's children, of humans, becoming more powerful and empowering themselves, and becoming even more honed with their belief, their might, holiness, or their strength to fend off the murderers. Where vampirism was almost a tool to help prepare humanity for the next step of humanism. And therefore, of all the ironies, vampires themselves were nothing more than the chess piece of God or the tool of God, because now they've run their course, they've burnt out, and the legacy is now that humans will become whatever this next meta-human is, because to vampires, you're thin-blooded. That same person to a human is Captain America. Is a hero, has tremendous endurance and abilities, and is to many people lauded, and so they can exist in that realm. And I see them as they are the weakest in a sense. I mean, there's their alchemy and everything, but they're the weakest in the sense, but that they are the mark of the end times of vampires. You had a good run, but you know what? You served your purpose, and that's it. So I hope, Dark Druid, did we answer your question in our unique ways? And for all of you out there as well, Goblin, Cloaking Dust, howdy to you, Rip Artist, Orchid. If you have other questions, please do feel free to ask. Now that being said, because you went through and you touched on a lot of other things. How can we have storylines of fear, of violence, This can be born through the clans. This can be born through the conditions in the city, where the domain is, and just how ripe the domain is to hunt in. You actually you did an amazing job of addressing all of this, and not only the points that breach normality, or breach the banal, but then by addressing the things that are challenged. The things that we hold dear that help support us. So in the last couple minutes here, because it is a little after 3:30 for me, and this segment's gone on for about an hour. If there's any other questions in chat, please ask. And then Derek, because you have been answering my questions this whole time, is there something that either you want to address that it wasn't in response to a prompt, so maybe I passed over something? There's an aspect to the game that you want to talk about, or is there something you would like everyone who's watching, because we have about 60 people watching us right now, in regards to the nature of horror and or where it intersects with vampire? Is there a sort of a capstone to our conversation that you would like to leave everyone here tonight?
Horror, you'll end up finding, is everywhere in the flights of fancy that you might not want to end up going about. Sometimes it's that little thought, that horrible thought in your head. Immediate question would be, are you sure that that thought was yours? Maybe you look in the mirror, and maybe you can ask yourself, what does your reflection think about you right now? And what would it do to you knowing what you did to it, as it has to live your life, not the other way around? Start to look inward, look outward. It's the same story. The shaman sits around the campfire and says, "From whence cometh evil?" And one of two answers will be given inevitably. Evil is out there, up past the campfire, in the dark. It is that thing outside, the unknown, that should be afraid. The other shaman would say, point to their chest and say, it's in here. It's inside each of us. The reason that games like Vampire work so well as a horror game is that they kind of force you to look inward and realize that kind of monster that might be lurking in your own head. You'd say, I'd never do that. Maybe not. But you thought about it. It's that stray thought, that little question. Maybe you had that moment where you thought, am I a psychopath? Dance with that a little bit. It's your own personal devil. To really start to end up understanding that and start to realize that you will end up finding monsters everywhere and in things that you never really considered. We live in a terrifying world. All you need to do is look. But in the nature of horror, and it's always been the nature of horror, is it is always a preparation, a thought experiment, or a story that makes you maybe better prepared. A lot of people don't like watching horror movies. They don't like being uncomfortable. But really, what is it? It is preparing you to embrace that bit of being uncomfortable. Exercise stress response. Maybe you'll call it exposure therapy. Exposure therapy and the idea that you may no longer be on this world anymore, or that you might have be driven to a point of desperation. The idea that the people around you may not be what they seem, or maybe, just maybe, There's something you don't understand, pushing just out of sight. But you know it's there. You will end up finding that in your day-to-day. Use that. Make it personal. And you will find that in all of your stories, everyone will understand. The worst part is, very few may want to admit it.
Rip Artist, I have to agree with you, especially after such a closer as that from Derek. I guess if we do have any last questions here for this, Orchid Twilight says, "What was the vampire in the first Night Stalker movie or show?"
Ooh, Night Stalker.
That I don't know offhand. And then Goblin of Gygaxanor asks, "Why is the bat the patron animal of vampires instead of the mosquito?" Goblin says, "I've never been scared of bats, but I hide in terror under the covers when there are mosquitoes on the prowl." My own answer to that, if Derek is working on Orchid's question, might come down to mosquitoes. Let's take it back to the academics of things here. Horror is found where things are threatening and impure. Mosquitoes are not necessarily threatening. You have dominion and domain over them. They're very controllable. You can slap them and make them go away. Or if any of you out there have ever done this, you can give them exactly what they want, because one of them lands on your arm and you pinch it and you watch them fill up until they burst. There's not really a threatening physically, psychologically, socially, morally, or spiritual threatening a mosquito offers, thus making them more impure, and mosquitoes as bugs and as bloodsuckers are really just more disgusting in that sense. They are impure creatures. So the horror is not there. Bats, however, there are vampire bats. Bats are things that are threatening. They can physically threaten you. Psychologically, they are creatures. They are mammals that go bump in the night. Very literally, they make their sounds. They're rats and mice, which we already find to be a threat, but they're rats and mice that can fly. And they're just overall just a creature of the night, which resembles something that, well, we're mammals too. We should act during the day. So I do believe that for many, bats have a threat. And bats are often seen as impure because of rabies, or where they live in their caves and it's full of guano and things along those lines. They eat bugs. Ew, gross. Like, things that eat bugs are also gross because bugs are gross. And so I think there's a more of an opening in the Venn diagram for bats to be horrific, and as vampires are also horrific, drink blood, are categorically ambiguous. Bats are mammals that fly. Mammals shouldn't fly. Bats are the platypus of the sky. These are categorically ambiguous creatures. So there's also where the impurity can come from. And so bats have a horror element similar to vampires, where mosquitoes, they have a similar action, but mosquitoes are really just the impure part of, they can invoke disgust, but, as a vampire can, but that doesn't really make them horrific. And all right, Derek, I'm sorry if you had an answer for Orchid Twilight.
Probably go with Malkavian, the first thought. Like, you're dealing is something that is off, we'll just end up saying. So my default answer, just at least on first glance, because it's been a long while, would probably be Malkavian in that regard. The other thing that we were talking about, like, me and Druid have had so many discussions on this, and yeah, part of it is you want it to make it personal. Lamprey is definitely there, but I would argue against what Maddie ended up saying. The reason that you can be terrified of mosquitoes, quite simply, is because of that impurity. That's what brings their threat, is the idea of disease. If you know how many people have died of mosquito bites, it's kind of off-putting. You know, the mosquito's more likely to kill you than lightning, that's for sure. You also get taking a point on how that ends up going. But yeah, we're parasites in general, Dark Druid. For me, the horror that I always enjoyed was the fact, and this is fairly common, supposedly. Anybody who's ever stood from a great height, like 5-6 stories up higher, looks over the ledge just to get that look, like, what is that? How far down is that? And that weird part of your brain that says jump. I love playing off of that one. That weird impulse, that thing in the back of your brain that despite all common sense, you still feel that. And that lack of control is the impurity. Right? That there is something that isn't quite right. And again, when you talk about what you were doing, when we talk about personal political horror, the horror comes from without, the corruption, especially in that of the Camarilla, but we'll also show the Anarchs and Sabbat aren't much better. But we're also taking a look at the fact that you yourself are impure. You're that thing that has a monstrous appetite. And to showcase the monstrousness that is within people, what vampire is it just drags out something that is, well, I'm trying to think of best to put this, but effectively what vampire does fantastically is it takes a small human element and pushes it so far that, would you even call it human anymore? Despite the fact that, guess what? We have canines. We are hunters. Like that, our eyes are in the front of our head. There is something that is inherently predatory in humanity. And that didn't go away. So, so with that in mind, playing off of that and playing off of others, I know you're a bit of an anime fan, so maybe you'll remember Perfect Blue.
Yeah.
There's a perfect example of horror, right? Yeah. You start to end up watching somebody psychologically break down. You end up seeing somebody where obsession has become all-consuming. You end up seeing a detached reality, a certain rhythm to this thing that has become the social ostracization. That happens. Okay, Orchid, you were asked, would they, even if they weren't aware? Well, the problem isn't that they aren't aware what they are. The problem is that eventually they're going to need to feed. Yeah. And they're going to do something that's going to get some attention. And the second that another vampire realizes, they don't need to know if you're catered for thin blood. All they need to know is you messed up with that secret we call the Masquerade, the one rule that you don't break. And they're going to remove you. You will be removed from the census. I'll politely say.
Yeah, humans go, what happened here? Vampires go, I know exactly what happened here. Because they can see their own. All right, everyone. I'm going to have to get going. I got a cat that needs tending to that I might need to take to the vet first thing in the morning instead of later. So let's go raid Tio Most Frio, who's doing some kit bashing. I see some other models. I see some spiders and stuff. He is doing some modeling. Let's go hang out with him. If you want to, so we'll take our mind creative workshop and let's translate it into hanging out with Tio and watching him do some construction with his hands, making monsters and such for D&D or just even decorations for Halloween. Thank you, everyone. This has been a lot of fun. Derek, thank you a ton for your time tonight, your expertise and your narration and explanation. It was wonderful. And everyone out there, I sincerely hope that you had a lot of fun. And tomorrow, we're going to do something similar, but with Alien RPG. What's that?
Maddie, I'm going to do this just because it's Rip Artist, okay? Rip Artist, why would they give up their power? It's really quite simple. At the end of it all, this is not a power. This is not cursed with awesomeness. This is an actual curse. And if your GM is doing his job right, if your ST is doing their job right, they will make sure you are miserable until you give it up. And then you'll get eaten. On that note, good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye.